The following podcast is a production of the Podpire Network. Find and listen to our podcasts at thepodpirenetwork.com or wherever you enjoy your podcast. The Podpire Network, a family of inspired podcasts.
One giant leap for mankind.
Welcome.
Welcome.
How do we say welcome in all the languages of the world, Sarah?
I gotta Google it up
How
right now.
How do we?
I know in Arabic.
Do justice to the fact that we're saying welcome again after such a long time.
Right?
What is what is welcome in Arabic?
I believe it says sahtain.
Okay. All right. And then I can add bienvenue, right? I can add willkommen, right? That's German.
There
right?
you go.
And, we're just so happy to be back on Interesting Humans, the podcast where we talk to interesting humans who, just give us so much to think about, so much to learn from. And it's been such a time away, so many life experiences for us.
That's right.
Personally, I became a dad. And I will tell you, thank you, Sarah. I will tell you that is nothing short of life-changing. My whole perspective on life has just shifted, right? And for all the parents out there, I have newfound respect for you. I have more respect for my parents, just going through that very delicate period of ushering in a new life and making sure that, the little one is fine and not knowing what you're doing at all. I said to my wife more than once, I said, it's criminal that the hospital sends you home with this newborn without a manual, because it's like, how do they think you're going to know what to do? Right. It's, but over time, it's just gotten so much easier. And now I don't even remember what my life was like before our little one came. So I'm just so grateful to be able to experience that and share that with all our interesting humans from across the world. And how are you doing, Sarah?
Oh, I've been great. I've gone through so much myself as well. On the better side of things, I got married.
Sarah,
so I'm not too far from your where you are standing, Bibi. I think I'll need a lot of tips from you already, and all the mothers around the world too, of course.
As soon as that happens, Sarah, just hit me up night or day. I'm only a text away.
Of course. But I'm so happy we're connecting on this platform now after so long. Coming back with so much more experience and maturity. So very excited to speak with our guests, share experiences again and connect with the world.
Yes. And speaking of our guests today, we couldn't have found a better guest to come back with, on this season, than the guest that we have the pleasure of having with us today, who is Bill Pearl.
Welcome.
Bill, how are you doing
Bill.
today, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you, and pleased to be here with you.
Thank you. It is truly an honor to have you here to talk with us about, a wide range of topics, from family relationships to, the family dynamic between fathers and sons, and, things about your experience in Vietnam and France, and your books that you've written. You are a published author. And I was telling you just before we hit record that you have, one of the coolest jobs ever, because you get to do all these book tours and travel to places and see things. So we're really excited to talk with you. And I cannot wait to unpack, all the treasures that you're going to be sharing with us. But before we go into that, we like to start off each episode with a segment that's near and dear to our hearts, and that is an interesting human story from around the world. And this one we're bringing home to Canada, Sarah and Bill, and it is a story about a woman who is an Inuk woman, so an indigenous Canadian woman, right, who is teaching her indigenous language online to help others reconnect with Inuit culture, right?
Okay.
And I think that is incredibly fantastic. It wasn't that long ago that, a lot of the world was getting shocked by things that we in Canada already knew for years and years, which was, all that story about the residential schools and what happened. There was a systematic effort to stamp out indigenous culture and wipe out indigenous languages, right? So, if you talk to indigenous people in Canada today, right, they can tell you about their moms and dads or grandparents who were part of those systems and who suffered greatly, psychological trauma, physical trauma, right? Trauma that sometimes is handed over through generations, right? So it is really, really beautiful right now to be able to, see someone who's taking this as a sort of calling and saying, I'm going to do something about it. And for indigenous people who want to reconnect with the culture and the language, we're going to do that, right? That's
bold, and that's very brave. That's a brave move.
Right. And her name, and I apologize in advance for any mispronunciations that I might make, right, or do. I am coming at this with a lot of respect. In fact, the entire purpose of this is to celebrate and highlight these people and what they're doing. So if I do make any mistakes, please forgive me. It is because I know no better. It's not because I'm not, trying to make the effort. The name of the platform is Allurvik, right? So that's Allurvik, right? And it means place to take your next step. And that's beautiful, right? And that is in the language of Inuktitut, right? I hope I'm saying that properly. And the name of the woman who started this is Miali Koli Sudlovnik, right? So I'm going to put the link to this story in the show notes. So hopefully if you see the spellings, you will understand why I've pronounced them that way, and forgive me for any mispronunciations. But yeah, I think this is really great stuff. What do you guys think about this?
I would add that I recently was in Anchorage, Alaska, and visited the Anchorage Museum, where they had an extraordinary exhibit on Inuit culture, right, and informed those that visit the museum about what's happened to indigenous cultures when they are interpreted through the eyes of more mass appeal contemporary cultures, and sometimes not damaged, but misunderstood and not respected, and treated in a way that makes the indigenous culture seem, because it's different and because it's primitive, somehow less than the Western, technologically oriented, economically oriented cultures in not just the United States, but in the Western world. You see it in the relationship between in colonialism, and the relationship between colonial powers historically and the countries they occupied, where the disrespect for indigenous cultures was very apparent. So I in brief, to be more brief about it, just to came away from that experience with a great respect for the beauty of indigenous cultures, and that they need to be protected. But to see someone like this who is advocating for their culture is a beautiful thing. And
it is beautiful. It is beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
just like you mentioned, Bill, like I feel the same way about this person. She's owned her culture, and like everybody must embrace their culture, right? And she's owned that no matter what background they came from, and they're passing that forward. They're teaching. They're bringing more awareness in this world, and I think that's the most brave thing somebody can do. So. Again, shout out to this person. Thank you for bringing that news, Bibi.
Yeah, no, I was really drawn to this, and I will say, just to add to something that Bill said, just the way we relate to indigenous cultures and languages. At the end of the day, you would like to think it's something lofty and there is a deep, psychological reason for certain things, but I have a slightly more cynical lens on this, which is just follow the money. I think that whatever language is the language of business is the language that gets, prioritized, or the culture that gets prioritized. And so because we don't have too many people doing business, global business in indigenous American language, right? It's easier to stamp out these things. Imagine if the language of business, if you wanted to do global business, you had to learn indigenous American language. You would learn that in school, right? Because it would be part of preparing you for the world, right? But because English or French or Mandarin, these are the languages that people associate with global business or, whatever. And they go with that and they act like all other languages don't exist, right? So it is up to the people who are from those cultures really to say, no, this might not be the language of business, but this still means something to us, right? And we're going to try and preserve that for our people, so that our children can speak the languages of our ancestors, right? That's important. So, I just say, it's everything, pretty much everything you look at. If you dig deep enough, there is a financial reason why, it is the way it is, whether it's a solution or a problem. For every problem that exists today, if you dig deep enough, you'll find the people who are benefiting financially from that, right? So that's just what I think.
I would add
that's an interesting take on that.
I would add to that. There's a cultural component too. Are you hearing me? Okay. Yeah. There's a cultural component to that too. I would call it cultural insensitivity or cultural ignorance, where people, particularly in Western cultures, tend to think of themselves as better than the rest. Civilizing the natives. What does that mean? It means that you're starting out with a fundamental disrespect for a culture that's different and simpler and maybe more familial and more focused on the aspects of life that work and actually are in some senses more fulfilling than modern life. And yet there's a sort of an aspect, it's not commercial so much, I don't think, it's more like a self-importance that people in Western cultures sometimes think of themselves because of the things they've accomplished, which can in and of themselves be great things, whether it's great architecture or great literature or great other aspects of their cultures, that therefore they're somehow superior to people who live in a different, simpler culture and one that's primitive. And even the word primitive is not the best way. It should be different, not primitive.
Right.
And sometimes primitive is more fulfilling and has aspects to it that are actually more rewarding and are lost in more complex, complicated societies. So there's an imbalance there. I'm not sure it purely is economic. I think it's in part comes from ignorance and sort of a cultural blindness.
That's right. Cultural blend, exactly. Yep.
So. Right. So no, I completely embrace that perspective as well. But yes, shout out to this lady doing this very incredible work. I think it was worth mentioning. And with that, we are done with that segment. We will go on a quick break, and then we will be back to talk to Bill about a whole host of things. So don't go nowhere.
Exciting.
We are still interesting humans. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back, and we are still here with Bill Pearl. And, just to read a little bit of his bio that I have in front of me here. So it says Bill Pearl is a native of Florida who travels to France for 2 months each year. Isn't that nice? Now, how has that been impacted by the global pandemic and all that stuff? You will tell us in a bit, Bill. But it says Bill is an American novelist, poet, former president of Pearl Broadcasting, and owner of the Florida-based radio station WNGS-FM. Bill holds a master's degree in international relations with a specialty in diplomatic history. His poetry and prose have been published in Time magazine, the George Washington University Hatchet, and Paris Voices, Paris, France. And it also says Bill's experiences as a student in Paris inspired his first novel, Hearts on Fire, Paris, 1968. His experiences in a family business and long-standing interest in Vietnam inspired the sequel, Mission in Paris, 1990, which he researched with visits to Vietnam, Paris, and Auvergne. Did I say that properly?
Auvergne,
France.
Auvergne,
France. Right. So, Bill, you are such an accomplished person that one would wonder, what are you doing on our little podcast with us on a bright weekend when you could be out playing golf? But we're so grateful to have you with us, really, because, our podcast really is about talking with people, that are not necessarily in the news, right? That are not necessarily, social media influencers, but who are nonetheless extremely interesting. And it is our job to make sure that by highlighting these stories, we give people a sense that there's always more to the people that they meet, right? The people they run into, the people they come across. And you are such an accomplished individual, that Sarah and I have been waiting for months, literally for months, to be able to talk with you. Right? Almost a year even, right? To be able to talk to you. Welcome once again to Interesting Humans.
Hey guys.
I'm very happy to have you here.
No pressure there in the build-up, right? No pressure.
Look, you can do this in your sleep, I'm sure. But let's start at the beginning. So, where did Bill Pearl start? Where did you come from? Where did you originate? What was your childhood like?
Came from...
Sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. I was going to say I came from Helen's womb. Helen, my late beautiful mother's womb.
Right.
That's where I came from. I'm certain of it. I am certain of that.
You're quite sure? Okay.
Yes, I'm quite sure.
Right.
She told me. Right. And she also told me. She told me I was a breech baby, and I gave her the hardest time.
Right.
In comparison with the other two children.
Right.
I was the tough one.
Right. Okay. All right. And speaking of your mother, it's fascinating to note that she lived to be over 100.
That's right.
And that is a beautiful thing. And as we recount, all of the things that we've gone through in our personal lives over the past year, it's also important to note that, your mother only just recently departed, and right. you are doing a fantastic job of keeping her memory alive. So well done with that. And thank like you. I said to you off mic, I can relate to that. I also lost my mom. And I know what that's like. And it does add some color, some depth to life. And you start to look at things slightly differently, because a mother is just one of those figures you assume they're going to live forever, no matter how old they get. You just, oh yeah, mom's always going to be there. You know what I mean? Right. So, but not to get too sidetracked. So you were born, were you born in Florida, or did you move there after a while?
No, I was born in Trenton, New Jersey.
Okay.
And later moved to Florida.
Okay.
Wow.
And I'm a New Jersey native.
All right. And,
Closer to Canada.
closer, much.
There you go.
Much closer to
Not
Canada.
quite there, but closer.
Much closer than Florida, I'll tell you that.
No wonder why we're all getting along so well already.
There you go.
That's right. And as a young child, did you have any indication that you were going to go on to do the things that you did, such as, writing and being involved in the broadcasting space, or, being interested in travel, and gaining, international perspectives? Was there always some sign that you could point to and say, oh yeah, you can sort of draw the line through my childhood to, what I'm doing now? Or was this a surprise for everyone?
I think there were antecedents, for sure.
Okay.
When I was a young student in private school, my most rewarding experiences were in writing.
Okay.
I entered each year a writing contest called the Ronan Contest, submitted my work and read it, actually.
Nice.
And then I think one of the key moments of my education as a young man was when my English teacher took a short story that I wrote called Fog, which was loosely based on my childhood visit to Disney World. And he said to me, his comment was, "You're not quite a Hemingway yet, but it shows a lot of promise." I'm roughly paraphrasing.
Right,
and boy, did that comment really motivate me. I mean, I remember that like it was yesterday. And we're talking many years ago, but I remember that moment. His name is Mr. Liefeld.
Right.
And then also,
thank you, Mr. Liefeld, because
there you go.
I think teachers are extremely overlooked in the impact they have on our lives in total.
Big
one
time.
bad teacher can derail your entire
Absolutely.
path, and one kind word or one extra effort from a good teacher can change your entire life for the better, right? So I didn't want us to skip over that. And if there's a teacher that you're specifically singling out to call out in a positive way, we want to make sure that we
they deserve it.
Yeah, exactly. We want to make sure that we note them as well and thank them, right?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And what you're saying is so important that there oftentimes is not the respect for the importance of the role of teachers in raising and influencing young children. It can be awesome in the positive vein, and it can be awesome in the negative vein if they're not doing their job or if they're thoughtless and insensitive. I have a story about that, but I'll spare you that story because it'll be a digression. It doesn't relate to me. It relates to a friend of mine. And so...
Who knows? We might circle back on that. It could be a very interesting one too.
Yeah. Well, actually, maybe I should just tell it very briefly.
Please go ahead.
Sure. This is a friend. This is the son of a friend of mine who, at a parent-teacher conference, one of the teachers said, something to the effect, your boy is never going to amount to anything if he keeps behaving like this. He's never going to amount to anything if he behaves in a certain way. I guess he was
allowed to say that.
That's the gist of what was said. Right. Maybe the words are a little different, but that's and it was in front of his parents, and the teacher says this. So and this was a young man who was brilliant, a genius, in fact, but whose social skills were different than other kids, because sometimes in genius there are accompanying personality traits that are different. And rather than respect that, understand that, and look to lift the child up, this teacher comes in with a harsh judgment. So fast forward 20 years later, the parents are visiting their son. He has just been given a top job at a major internet-based high-tech company, and he's living in a $1,800,000 house in someplace in California, in the tech areas of California, and he's been given this promotion, and his parents are visiting, and he's his parents are toasting him, and he toasts to Mrs. or to Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so,
right,
who said I was never going to make it.
Right.
There you go.
And it was like one of those full circle moments to show he never forgot that pain.
You never,
that hurt.
And it's amazing that he used it as a motivation as well, right? And remembered that.
That's right. That's right.
You know, to drive him forward where he is today. So that's good. That's amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, so this teacher took an interest in your writing, and he gave you this very, sort of encouraging comment. And from then you dug deeper in and you decided to get better at it. Was there anything specific that you did to get better as a writer? Because I'm sure there's at least one person listening to this who has similar aspirations and are wondering, you know, outside of, you know, going to college and specifically taking a course or doing a major that is focused on writing and literature, is there anything in the real world that is accessible to me that can help make me a better writer?
Oh my, there are many, many tools. I would say two things. I would say first, to those who think of themselves as writers, who enjoy the process of writing, do it. Number one, do it. Don't let anything get in the way of doing it. Number two, we live in a world where there are more tools for learning available than ever before. I mean, there are courses you can take online. There are YouTube courses. There are, I mean, there's just no end to the amount of expertise that's available, readily available today as compared to in times past. So, you know, I think the combination of actually doing it and at the same time dedicating yourself to self-improvement in the craft are the way forward. And you know, oftentimes whether or not you have a successful result will also depend on things like good luck, being in the right place at the right time. But the fact that one who thinks of themselves and enjoys the process of writing does it, and then at the same time commits to self-learning and to continuous improvement is the combination that I think you want to shoot for. That would be my advice to others.
Absolutely. Like you've mentioned, there are tools available out there that people can use to their advantage, but it all starts from self-initiation. It all starts from just getting right into it. Whether you believe in it or not, you have to go in with the mindset that you can do it and you will practice to do it.
Yes, Sarah. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And from the furious notes that I was taking, Bill, while you were saying that, it might have become obvious that I was actually asking for me. So when I say there are people out there, maybe I was really asking for myself. But no, I find what you said extremely insightful. And as with many other things in life, you have to start with a strong sense of conviction that this is something you want to do. Because anything, no matter how excited you are in the beginning, if you don't have that sense of dedication, discipline, and consistency to keep trying at it, it will very quickly become something else that you've given up on, right? And we can all look in our lives and point to several things that have started that way and we've given up on, right? And today they're just distant memories. So thank you for sharing that. Now, we will be looking at some of your books that you've written. And again, I want to recommend highly, that anyone listening to this should go look in the show notes for the episode and click the links that we will be providing to some of Bill's work. We will go into those a bit more deeply in a short while. But right now, you know, we want to unpack some other things too. So, you know, as we were getting to know you and preparing for the episode, again, over several months, you know, we were able to uncover the fact that you have experience, dealing with family conflict, you know, and ways to resolve those, right? You know, I cannot tell you how timely such a conversation is right now for many, many people all over the world. I think before COVID, a lot of us were just able to avoid certain things about being in a family, being in a relationship. We were able to, make ourselves busy with work and with social events and not have to deal with this or that family member that we would rather not associate with so much, or rather not have certain conversations with, because, every time I start to have this conversation with James, it just blows up. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But the pandemic did a few things. In some cases, it trapped you literally in the same building or home with the people that you've been working so hard to avoid all these years. You couldn't go anywhere. You were stuck at home, right?
There's not a lot of distractions around to take you away.
There's only so many Netflix movies you can watch before you have to have a real conversation, right? It brought to the forefront of your consciousness the fragility of life, right? Just looking at the figures, wasn't it a week or two ago, just very casually on CNN, very casually, no fanfare, just announced, the US has now crossed over 1 million people who've died from COVID. That is ridiculous. That is more than, isn't that more than any world? That is ridiculous.
Right.
That is more than all the Americans who died in both world wars combined, right?
Exactly.
And so you can say to a degree of certainty that most people have known, at least to a first or second degree of separation, someone, a loved one, a friend, an associate, someone who's passed away from COVID, right?
Yeah.
And so in a family, it brings to the forefront thoughts of the fragility of life, just how transient everything is. And it forces you to reconsider your
connections
stance,
with,
should I say, of not dealing with certain things, right? And so these are the reasons, Bill, that I say, why I say this is a very timely conversation, because, we heard some reports over the past few months, the rate of divorces were going up, because people realized that they couldn't stand each other. At the end of the day, they didn't have a solid enough foundation to be in a romantic, family, whatever relationship to begin with, right? So now is a good time to have this conversation about dealing with family conflict, whether this is conflict between spouses or partners or siblings or whatever it is. What can you tell us about your experience dealing with this, and what are the ways that you would recommend that we approach issues like this?
Yep. By the way, I'm very excited for this response, because not a lot of psychotherapists can even answer that in one go.
So I'm very
pressure's
excited.
I'm looking forward to your response. Exactly.
Pressure's on, Bill.
Coming from a person who's coming from a lot of experience and expertise in this, so.
Let me answer that in three tranches, three ways. First, perhaps the most rewarding moment as an author that I've ever had just happened in the city of Chartres, France, where I was there presenting at a bookstore, and I met a woman named Leslie, who told me, having read my book Mission in Paris 1990, that she had been, after her mother died, in a state of polarization with her sister. They were fighting over the disposition of a house in the family owned by the mother. And they weren't talking to each other, and it was very, very bad. And after she read the book, she decided to pick up the phone and call the sister. And I thought, oh my goodness, that was like very, very
That's amazing.
Powerful moment for me, because to see something that I worked on from the standpoint of just a literature that would be interesting and informative impact someone else in that way was a very powerful moment for me. The second tranche of how I'll answer that question is to speak about myself, because the raw material that I was able to call upon to write the book, one component of which is a fictional conflict between a father and son.
Okay.
it was my own experience with my father. My father was of the era in America where the male primarily and exclusively concerned himself with hunter-gatherer, go out and kill the animals, bring home the food, and that sort of thing. And
not too much nurturing going on. Right.
No, there wasn't a lot of nurturing. There wasn't a lot of self-expectation about nurturing in that. My family was poor. My father had to survive. He had 5 brothers. He had his own issues in his own family with respect to how he viewed himself amongst the competition of 5 siblings. All kinds of family history or components of family history that are intergenerational. You don't ever deal just in your own family. You deal from the perspective of the families that came before and how they impacted.
Because each one is a product of the previous one and
correct,
on and on.
Correct.
Right.
And what you're experiencing in the father-son relationship has to do with what the father experienced, and so it's passed on. So in this experience with my father, I had to learn to cope with a father with whom I was in business, because although I cited before in my own background my experience in writing, which was had antecedents when I was younger, my experience as a businessman also had antecedents. For example, I used to run the bookstore, the paperback bookstore at my prep school. And I loved doing that. I had a cash box. I sold books. I kept tallies. And so there was a part of that in me as well. So I spent a period of my life earlier with my father in a family business. And it was very painful to me because my father was from that generation where he more competed with me than he did attempt and found himself able to nurture me. And when you're with a parent in a family environment and they're competing with you rather than able to build you up and nurture you and sort of groom you, then it can be very, very painful. So I had that personal experience, and I'll add as a footnote to that, in terms of lessons for those who may hear this and be in a similar circumstance. My advice after going through it is to stay with the parent. Don't leave because it's contentious. Don't leave because you're in a moment where it's not working. Because if you work at it, if you stay with the relationship through the thin, there can be a thick on the other side. Through the bad, there can be a good. You can work towards resolution. You can work towards communication. And you know what? People change. My father changed. He ended up passing away from Alzheimer's. And before he was lost to us because of the disease, he came to see a lot of things differently, including his relationship with me. Had I not stayed with him through the bad times, I never would have reached that moment when things could change. But it also took a lot of effort on my part, because sometimes the easiest things to do sometimes is when you're in a contentious moment with someone, is just to wash your hands of it and say,
"That's right,
I'm done."
That's right.
Now a question for you. A question for you around that, because this is not just hypotheticals we're talking about here. This is a lot of people who will be listening to this will be saying, you're talking about my situation. This happens far more often than is publicly discussed, right? How do you square your advice with, the fact that some people, let me come at this from a different angle. Sometimes it takes 2 people to make something work. If you, as the child who is bearing the brunt of this sort of the abusive, sort of unfriendly relationship, let's call it unfriendly, right? Let's not use words that are too likely to incite, right? So unfriendly relationship. If you are trying, but your father has no interest in trying, how does that work out? Now, in your case, eventually your dad came around, but there are situations where the old man is just stubborn and stubborn until their last breath, and there is nothing you can tell them to make them see things any differently.
Yep.
At what point do you say, I'm walking away from this, not because I'm giving up, but because for my mental health and my self-esteem and my psychological balance, and for me to be able to be a better person for example, I started my own family. I want to be a better person for my own family. So I'm walking away from this toxic thing that I have to endure day in, day out with my old man, right? At what point do you see that as the courageous thing to do as against giving up? Right?
That's right.
And I've said a lot of things, but I do hope the question did come across.
No, it did completely, and I think you're pointing to a very important dilemma. And I would say, first of all, there is no one size fits all when it comes to relationships. I think each circumstance is different, and the judgments that people make have to be tailored to what they're experiencing and to what they learn about themselves and what the parent, if it's a parent-child relationship, and there are clearly, and it's important to recognize, and it is an act of bravery when someone protects themselves by taking themselves out of a situation where it's so toxic or it's so violent or it's so impossible that they need to step away, that they take care of themselves that way. That is a possibility, and for certain circumstances, I don't think you can prescribe one answer for everyone. I was describing what I did and what I found myself able to do. But I do think there are circumstances where it's less clear that it is a moment or a bunch of moments that lead to the conclusion that you have to end it to protect yourself, but it's just unpleasant, where there's lack of communication, inability to get to understand, where there's a sort of a gray area that in which the choice can be between sticking through it with a different approach versus leaving it, where oftentimes people do leave, and they leave before they have the opportunity to see if it's fixable.
That's right.
That's a different circumstance than what you're describing. If you're in a situation where it's so toxic, so dangerous, where it's clear whether it's a horrific form of verbal abuse or physical abuse, you have to step out. You have to protect yourself, and that sometimes happens in life. It happens, but there are a lot of circumstances where it's not that. It's the gray area where people still step away. I'll share the third tranche of what I was going to answer before, and it's a passage from my book that has to do with this question of how do you reconcile? How do you do this? And there's a portion in the book where the main character asks his love, the love of his life, Mihan. The main character is Robert, and he is considering, he's in a situation with his own father where they're at odds. They don't get along. They don't understand each other. The father doesn't appear to respect the son. The son doesn't know how to reach the father. But Robert wants to go back. He's in the hospital at this point. He wants to go home and see his father. He wants to see if he can reach his father. So he asked Mihan, who is his first love and someone who he is in a relationship with, for her advice about how to heal his relationship with his father. And so he looks at her and he says, "Do you have any advice?" And she thinks a second and she goes, 3 things. And she reaches for his hand and she falls silent for a moment to gather her thoughts. And he looks at her and says, "All right, what?" He's impatient to hear this magic solution. And she says to him, "First, when you see him, take a breath and admit to yourself that you are suffering." And he looked at her quizzically. Robbie looked at Mihan quizzically, and he said, right, I get that. I am suffering. Then she said, "Find the courage to tell him or show him." And he looks down. He's a little skeptical at that point. He goes, "Right, sure." And then she says, find a way to tell him that he is suffering too. And he asks, do you think he is? And she says, I know he is. That's what's below his armor and yours. So we're both victims, Robbie says. Yes, Mihan says. And tell him you need his help. You want to understand him. I'll probably get punished, he said. You will, and you must bear it like you have borne the pain in your body. He's in the hospital, been in pain. And then he says, and after that, she says, become a refuge for him so he can become a refuge for you. And he says, you make that sound easy. And she says, it is, Robert, if you open your heart. Oh, right, he says, right. He clasped her hand tightly as they watched the finale of the sunset before them. And Mihan rises from her chair, gently kisses him. It's their first kiss on the lips since this visit to the hospital that she made. And rather than engaging in a long goodbye, she reaches in her bag, hands him a letter, and leaves to go back to Vietnam. So in that conversation, I was trying to, through the character of Mihan, create a somewhat of a template for what's important when you're in a polarized circumstance with someone, what's important about, or what is identifiable as a pathway to move it forward.
Right.
And it's implicit in that advice that she gave him.
That's right. That's right.
Does that resonate? I mean,
absolutely. And I think in a lot of situations that is true. I mean, depending on the circumstances that the person is going through, or the situation, of course, of the relationship, it's easy, like you mentioned, it's easy to, I wouldn't say selfishly, but be caught up in your own emotions or in your own state of mind, right? And it's difficult to see that what you're going through is also what the other person is going through. So that passage clearly describes that if you're suffering, the other person is suffering as well. And that's a difficult moment to have within yourself to take yourself out of that situation when you are suffering, and really think with an open mind that it's not just you, but it's also the other person that's in pain. And
what does that do? That creates some common ground there. You're all of a sudden at the same level.
Exactly. And it creates that empathy amongst the two parties as well, that you understand what I'm going through. It makes it easier for the other person to come forward, maybe with some empathy towards the other person. But it is I must say that it's a very brave move, or it doesn't come out. It's an acquired skill to have for someone to really picture themselves out of the situation, think of it from a broader perspective.
It is very counterintuitive.
Exactly.
Because humans are programmed to survive, first of all. So everything that you're instinctively programmed to do is to protect yourself, right? Not to expose a vulnerable flank.
Exactly.
Which is, I think, part of this strategy, if you could call it that, is, there, as I was thinking about this, and as you were reading that excerpt from the book, Bill, was there is no response to that, there is no defense against that. So if you're used to, as soon as you see someone, you're both going at it. If one day they come to you and say, can we not do this today? I'm suffering. That catches you completely off guard. There's no response to that. You're not ready for that. That is perhaps one of the only opportunities that both of you will get to have an honest conversation, right? Because you're just not equipped to deal with that. You were ready for the usual contentions and the usual going head to head and slamming the door and, saying the harshest, most unkind words. But if the person is saying, look, I need your help, and I think you're suffering too, and I want to understand you, and that's not something you're used to, so you have no response for it. And having no response for it, perhaps you can be your most honest self, right? And that's
Because
whether, yeah, go ahead.
I just think the first self identity that you have is your ego. From when you're born to when you're being raised by a person, who's helping you regulate your emotions. The first form of identity you have is ego. And the first thing that gets triggered when you're in your conflict is your ego. You feel like your identity is under threat. You feel like somebody is, threatening your perspective or your point of view. And bringing yourself out of that and thinking of it from exactly, it's very difficult. And again, like I mentioned, it depends how you're being nurtured, how you're being raised, what you've seen growing up, what environment you've lived in growing up. Like, for example, a situation in a monk's household is completely different from, just another average person's household.
That's right. That's right. No, I thank you so much for sharing that treasure. It is a good segue into the books because, we do talk about the fact that you have written books and you have just shared a very beautiful part of one of the books. Can you tell us a little bit about, your two books that we're focusing on today, which is Hearts on Fire, Paris, 1968, and Mission in Paris, 1990, which coincidentally was the year that I was born. So
nice. Well, the
1990, not 1968.
1990. Yes. Well, the books have been a great joy for me. You were talking before about some of the aspects of working as an author that are often thought of as being romantic and travel and going to interesting places to do research and that sort of thing, which of course is a lot of fun. But the work that I think of myself as a wordsmith, and the work that I do is really with words. It's by myself, really, working with words as a creator of a reality or creator of a storytelling, and then polishing those words so that they most effectively tell the tale, tell the story, and that is the part of being an author or being a writer that I love the most. I love working with words. It's a joy to me.
That's amazing.
Well, it's no.
It's beautiful.
Well, I don't think it's. Whether you're a writer or a painter, if you're fortunate enough to be in the arts, or whether you're doing a podcast, if you can express yourself in the arts in some way, that is always a very fulfilling.
Absolutely.
Well, it is. It is a form of art.
I'm sure there are people who will disagree strongly, but thank you.
No, I don't. I see it the way I see it, but anyway. So the gestation of the books, come from my lifelong desire to write and to be a writer. I made choices earlier in my life which I do not regret, but that took me away from the path of dedicating myself full time to the work of writing. I always wrote, and I always incorporated my love of words into whatever I was doing. But there came a point later in my life where I decided that I wanted to devote myself full time. So I took the other things that I had been involved with, which was business, and I asked other people to take those responsibilities over for me, to clear the decks, so to speak, so I could dedicate myself to writing the two books. And the origins of the first book were my time in Paris in 1968 as a student. I was a student there during the year, which was a tumultuous and very unusual year across the globe. This was the age before the internet, and yet you had the spirit of rebellion against authority that manifested cross-culturally, cross the boundary lines of nations, without it went viral before there was anything to go viral. There was no internet. There was no nothing like that. And yet there was a shared sentiment I think in part propelled by the advent of television news coverage, because this was the era for the first time when you could be a student in France and see news coverage of the civil rights demonstrations, Selma, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the demonstrations that went on against the war, which of course
the revolution
was
being televised.
That's right.
Right.
Now it was rudimentary. It was not anywhere near as omnipresent and as in your face as today's multiplicity of media outlets create for us, where everything is virtually in real time. But just the fact that there was this unjust war with a small country being eviscerated, so to speak, by a large, powerful, technologically advanced country.
Are we talking about today, or we're talking about several decades ago?
We could be talking. We could be talking about today.
Might as well be talking about today, right? I mean,
it's not a phenomena that it's not a phenomena that is that has not repeated itself.
Exactly.
But in 1968, I think there was the first opportunity for a certain level of world consciousness to be focused, especially among younger people, to understand the injustice of what was happening in the Vietnam War, to stand against it in a democratic society. And so, it was a very interesting time. And of course, it was also a time of upheaval in France, where I was a student. And the changes socially and economically that had taken place there led to a very an environment where there were mass demonstrations and a student rebellion against the order of things as they were, the highly structured society that existed in France. I witnessed this, and hence the gestation of the book, because I thought to myself as I watched the marches and watched the demonstrations on the streets of Paris, that someday I thought I'm going to write about this. I don't know when, I don't know how, but that's where the germ was planted. That was where the seed was planted. Right. And so years later, when I went to write my novel, I really loosely based it on those experiences in Paris.
That's great.
I loosely based it on experiences that I had and myself. I loosely based it on the passions of the moment, the political and social passions of the moment. And they were so enormous that they were just wonderful raw material to create a story. And so I created a story around all these things, and this became Hearts on Fire, Paris, 1968. Now, this was my first novel, and I had a lot to learn. I don't know that I knew when I started how much I had to learn, but I had a lot to learn.
But you just start. That's what we were talking about earlier. You just start, right? Just start, and the journey will unfold in front of you, right?
And I had a lot of help and support from some really terrific editors who participated, and so I was very proud of the first work. And when it was published in France in 2018, my editor suggested that it had the components to become a trilogy, and that I should write a sequel, which became Mission in Paris, 1990.
Right.
And then the third book I haven't started yet, but it will take Mission in Paris takes the events as they ended in 1968, 22 years later to 1990. Okay. And then the sequel, the final book in the trilogy, will take them all the way up to
not to give too much away. Not to give too much away. No,
that's okay.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect.
So,
No, that's wonderful. And, I think that you have shared enough already for anyone listening to know by now, to be excited to go check out the book, right? The books, right? So I would say,
Absolutely.
please, use the links in the show notes. They are not affiliate links. We're not getting paid for each click. It's just straight to the link to buy the book, right? And you can already tell that this will be a very enriching experience for you. You've heard Bill speak, so he's articulate, and you have sort of a sense of what to expect in the books themselves. And I would recommend. I would say that we can go on and on with you indefinitely, but unfortunately that's not how podcasts work. They have a specific start and an end, and sadly we are approaching that end point. But we still get to come back with you after the break to do a summary and to ask you a very important question, perhaps the most important question of the entire episode.
Yes, bring it back,
the
baby.
Most revealing question of the entire episode. But we'll save that for when we return. So we're gonna go on that quick break now, and we will be back shortly. Don't go nowhere. And we're back with Bill.
We are back.
And at this point, we've had such an enlightening conversation. Sarah, would you agree with that? Such an enlightening.
I absolutely agree. Yep, this was
such
amazing.
Informative. It just felt like the whole conversation was coming from a place of truth, and it wasn't, there was no affected airs on the pod. There was no, you would almost forget that you're talking with a very accomplished individual, right?
Exactly.
And that just, it says a lot about who you are, Bill. So again, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
And
this was absolutely the most passionate conversation that we've had as well. Wow. And we tend to have very in-depth conversations in our podcast, and this was one of those where
deep.
This
one goes deep.
Exactly. We were all able to reflect on some point and with a lot of passion and insight. And thank you, Bill, for bringing that forward.
No.
I gotta say, you made me speechless in a lot of points. I was just here in the background saying,
I couldn't agree more. And, I think, just by way of summary, each conflict is different, as Bill has mentioned, but we should be looking for the points of intersection, right, rather than the points of divergence. I think is my biggest takeaway.
Exactly.
And even in some of the strongest, most long-standing conflicts, a common point of intersection is the fact that you can count on the fact that despite what you both parties are suffering. And if you can both honestly acknowledge that to each other, there might be a chance for reconciliation and moving forward. Now, reconciliation might not always mean that you become the best of friends, but it could mean a resetting of the relationship, at the very least, where there is more respect, right? There is more of an acknowledgement of the humanity of the other person. Because I feel like when we've been in a conflict so long with someone, we stop thinking of them as a human being.
100%.
They're just an entity
100%.
now that we're in conflict with, not a human anymore, right? And I think having those conversations driven by honesty brings it back to the forefront of your mind that, this is a human being just like myself, and they're probably going through something too, right? Just like I am. So again, thank you, Bill, for that. Really appreciate that.
And just in a polarizing world that we are, that you've already mentioned, Bill, how people have their own biased opinion about certain matters, and just in a very high-tech world that we're in right now, where we're being feeded information based on how vulnerable we are. I recently watched a show on Netflix on I can't remember the name, but it was literally about just political viewpoints and how Facebook and all these, big tech companies sometimes tend to use your vulnerability with the data that you've provided to them to alter your opinion or view perspective about certain matters, right?
Red meat, right? Just get you angrier based on what you're already predisposed to think, right? Without ever stopping to think about the other perspectives that might be out there that might be valid, right? Not always. They're not always valid, but some might. And if you don't take the chance to check them out, you'll never know, right?
100%. Just putting your best foot forward, like you mentioned, Bibi, right? Just making sure that you are the one who are enabling it, at least, to kind of give perspective on the gray area, to give benefit of doubt or something that is, in the middle ground, not necessarily that they're right or wrong, not necessarily having a polarizing view, but just being satisfied knowing that there could be a gray area, and putting your best foot forward always is something that I'm definitely taking away from this, and something that we should all practice in our day-to-day lifestyle. So
absolutely. Yeah. Really enlightening. Sarah, you want to go ahead and ask Bill the question of questions?
Yes, baby. Oh my God, you have no idea how long I've waited for this moment. I'm incredibly excited for this. And Bill, are you ready for this?
Are you going to ask me what I'm having? You're going to ask me what I'm having for lunch today?
Nothing quite so tough. No.
Nothing so tough. Right. Okay. All right.
All right. With everything that you've experienced and shared with us so far on this podcast, I'd like to ask you, what is one advice that you could give your younger self if you were to go back in time? You can take your moment. Yeah. I know this is a very precious question.
Yeah.
I would advise my younger self to be brave. To be brave. Braver.
Braver.
This brings to mind to me a quote that I'll roughly paraphrase from Nelson Mandela. He once, I think he said something to the effect that our deepest fears are not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are we not to be? We are a child of God. We all are. And our playing small doesn't serve the world. I didn't know this so much when I was younger. But as we let our light shine, Mandela said, we consciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, as we are braver in being who we are, in being known as who we are, our presence automatically liberates others. And that's the spirit of what I would advise my younger self.
I know that.
I know that amazing,
quote. I knew it before today, but I needed to hear it right now. Because
there you go.
It's you have to keep reminding yourself, don't you? Because it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day nonsense that you get, just the mundane, monotonous things, and you forget the bigger picture of, wait a minute, I'm more than this. I'm, I can do more. I'm larger than this, and the things that seem to dwarf you suddenly become much less intimidating. So, thank you, Bill. This was great.
Thank you.
This was great.
And this is one of the reasons why it's the most important question. And I love this question whenever I ask people, because it just gives you an insight not only about the person that you're speaking with, but it also gives an advice to yourself when you're in that position of when you want to remind yourself, right, that you're in a vulnerable state, or when you want to give that advice to another younger person, right? And it's absolutely true, like you've mentioned, that the sky's the limit. There's no boundaries when it comes to improving yourself. So
I would also just add, I'm having tuna fish for lunch.
Well, if I could ask you another question, I would ask, where did you get the shirt that you're wearing today? It's absolutely vacation friendly, and it's already taking me. I mean, for the people that are not able to see what we're seeing right now,
is a nice
Bill
floral,
is wearing
tropical looking shirt, and it's just,
I just want to go to Hawaii.
Lit up the entire meeting, the entire session. Yes.
Thank you for your compliments.
It's absolutely amazing.
It's a bit Florida man, but it's okay. It's okay.
Florida man in a good way. In a good way. Yes. Florida man in a good way. Look, we thank you, Bill, for your time. We thank you for being our first guest back. Wow. I did say at the very beginning that we couldn't have chosen a better guest to come back with, and I think I've been more than justified. But at this point, to have said that, we're truly grateful. We would like to let our listeners know where they can find you. So where can our listeners find you on the internet? Is there any website you would like to inform us of, or any social media handles? Where can our listeners go and interact with you?
Just info at billpearl.net is the way to reach me.
Okay.
Info at billpearl.net.
Okay.
And my website is just www.billpearl.net.
Okay.
www.simpleBillPearl.net, and that
perfect.
Take you to my website, and
awesome.
Then that's where.
Is there where we can be up to date with the new book that you'll be having launched soon, I believe?
Yes.
Okay.
And all the things that I'll be doing are
will be on billpearl.net. Okay. Awesome.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. Yes. So we are, also on the internet. And for those who haven't noticed, the Interesting Humans podcast is now a part of the Podpire Network. So we're very thankful and we're very happy about that. Mm-hmm. You can find our pods on the podpirenetwork.com. And you can check out our socials at the Podpire Network on Instagram. We're also on Instagram as Interesting Humans Pod. So that is how to find us and interact with us on Instagram, on the social media. Listen, Bill, thank you so much. We have come to the end of the episode. And thank you to all our listeners for staying with us.
Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Bibi. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Best wishes to all. Best wishes to all.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Same to you.